From TMP to TTNG, for sure the cure and those tired meme jeans. Helican Sella and the promise ring. Sunny day, real estate and rights this spring. Prince Twinkle Daddies help keep the dream alive. I constantly thank God for Algernon and Remo Christie Front Drive. Mineral, snowing, high tide, hotelier, and more. Rio Limo only consists of the DC emotive hardcore. But you gotta admit, Kyle and Ellie really on that emo bullshit. You gotta admit that Kyle and Ellie really on that emo bullshit. Have you heard the tired and disavowed lonely word? Have you heard the disavowed and lonely word? Have you heard the lonely disavowed word? Have you heard the tired and lonely disavowed word?
I'll flip it on quick. This is episode 35 of the E-Word podcast. This is Kyle, recording here in Madison, Wisconsin. Over there, as always, co-host Ellie in Austin, Texas. Ellie, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I got a haircut today, so I'm feeling pretty positive about myself.
Great.
That post haircut lift up.
And we have a very special guest who I'm assuming why you got a haircut for. We have Christian Holden from the Hotelier on the podcast to talk about their album, The Decade Under the Influence, 2014 winner, Home Like NoPlace Is There. Christian, we're so stoked to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Very perceptive, Kyle. I got a haircut just so I could have the confidence to do this interview. Like the camera's not even on.
Christian, where are you at within the United States right now?
I'm at my house, in my room, at my desk, in Worcester, Massachusetts.
So we tend to go on very long on these interviews. I know we're on a schedule here, but before I forget to ask, what is the Hotelier up to? What are you up to? One thing I want to get out of the way is you're a professional poker player.
Yes, more or less. Professional would mean that I make my sole income from poker, and as of late, that is not really the case. But I am a serious student of the game, and am playing in a lot of my free time. And poker is just like a part of my everyday routine, for the most part.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then the Hotelier, is there anything on the books for y'all?
Not really. TBH. We just took a lot of downtime, and we're both missing certain aspects of playing music and not missing other aspects of playing music full time. So we're just hanging right now, and working, and slowly, if not completely at a halt right now, writing music. I think there's more anticipation of what we might be doing than there is what we're actually doing. Not recently, I guess over a year ago, I put out a tweet that said, my psychic says we'll be in the studio within the next 6 months, and everyone didn't read it and heard we'll be in the studio in the next 6 months. And so everyone's like, what's up? The Hotelier is supposed to be in the studio right now. I was like, I mean, if you believe the psychic, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, but that's what she said. She literally said that. So I was just reporting.
I guess that's what I was kind of alluding to, is like there was something with LP3 in the
Well,
works.
it would be LP4.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, because it never goes out. We have some ideas. but it's proven to be a difficult album to write. Maybe both in its in my insistency on one-upping the last things that we've done, and also just my life is not, my mind is not wrapped around writing an album right now, and it's hard for me to sort of put myself back in that headspace to do so currently. So I've just been I've just been sort of enjoying this time and not thinking that my entire life exists for me to write the next Hotelier album, and maybe I can sort of just do what my life is taking me to do, and treat that as the thing I should be doing. So yeah, that's sort of my way of putting it. Yeah.
That sounds positive to me.
It is pretty positive. Yeah, it's definitely not a bad thing. I've started enjoying music more than I had been. I started feeling less threatened by certain music than I had been. Being a professional musician in a way, and a lot of musicians might not realize it or just refuse to talk about it, but it is you're competing, on this stage sort of with these other people who are all also trying to get in the ears of a number of listeners, so
Right.
so whether you are attempting to or not, the sort of industry and just way that it's all set up means that you are competing for space, and I don't miss competing for space.
That was an intense materialist critique of the music industry.
Yeah, it's real. I don't know. If you just search around and just go on the Twitter of snail mail or soccer mommy, you'll see these musicians who are now newly big and are well, look at all this shit that sucks, So regularly they're just posting wow, this is annoying.
Did you kind of notice that around the time that Home came out, or was it after Goodness or anything like that?
I mean, we're halfway responsible for it too. Prior to our bands getting, emo is sort of the break in the dam for the industry to just start picking up DIY bands and throwing them on industry tours.
Yeah.
Well, I guess pop punk was part of it. It was pop punk, but then pop punk was just sort of just everyone wanted to be industry and nobody really cared about DIY. Everyone cared about DIY as long as they subsist, they needed it to exist in order for them to be a band. But then as soon as they were pretty much offered industry tours, they're oh, yep, doing that. Emo just had emo, and I'm referring to emo as
the
people were
umbrella term.
Yeah, well, I'm referring to it as specifically DIY in the early 2010s, which people were just calling math rock. That was DIY emo for a lot of it, or emo revival actually is what a lot of people were calling it. And then, as opposed to what NPR or BuzzFeed in 2013 and 2014 called emo, which was not the same thing. And is sort of what is considered emo now is that a little bit, but also, yeah. So all those emo bands were just DIY bands, and then just a couple of them were decided upon as the important bands of emo by whatever music media, and then there was just sort of this entry point for the industry to start quickly picking up new DIY bands and putting them on industry tours. There was just a way for them to do so. So yeah, so that was the start of it, sort of. And now there's almost no scene as far as I know, in the way that there was. There's a couple touring bands, and there's a couple bands in certain cities, but for the most part, it seems like there's less DIY infrastructure in all the cities. I don't know if I could. I mean, I guess Mom Jeans did it, but I don't know if I could book a full U.S. tour like I did in early 2014. Us and Oso Oso back when Oso Oso was Oso Oso Oso, did a full U.S. tour, and like it took like 7 weeks or something like that. So 7 weeks of shows. I don't know if I could do that again. Like certain cities, I just don't know if they have the infrastructure. But also on some of those shows, we played to like 6 people. So like, arguably they didn't have the infrastructure then either. But yeah.
That's really interesting. I feel like that's something that we've been trying to get at like the past like couple episodes of this series.
Yeah.
And you kind of articulated it perfectly with that switch from that really DIY math rock sound to maybe the more like indie rock influenced sound that is pretty dominant now. Damn, you nailed it.
And also like the industry part, because we left off basically like when The World Is album came out, they were playing DIY spots, and around when Home comes out, it is like the middle of, you know, DIY, and then Shitty Greg putting DIY bands on real tours, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Shitty Greg also booked a lot of DIY tours before that, and then he just was... Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if it's Greg's fault. Maybe it is.
I mean, Twinkle Daddies is Greg's fault, so I mean, we might as well blame everything else on him too.
I thought Twinkle Daddies was Dad's fault.
Greg and Casey from Hostage Calm came up with the term.
Okay.
But you could argue that the sound is Dad's fault as well.
Okay. Word.
Yeah. Kyle, did you have the other prelim questions?
Yeah, so I wanted to do some pre-Home Like No Place Is There questions for Hotelier. So it doesn't seem like there were many pre-Hotelier bands. I know there was one, and I forgot to write down the name, and I just listened to the Washed Up Emo podcast, and that was the only place that I'd heard of it.
Okay.
What was the band called?
What depends on... I'll tell you the brief history. There's actually technically 2 bands.
Okay.
So there was like a big scene in central Massachusetts right when I got into high school. And like my freshman year of high school, I had a pop rock band that was like mostly ripoffs of like MySpace pop rock. And it was called, yeah. That's where I got all my songwriting chops, which is why I'm a little bit more anthemic or whatever. So we had a band called Oregon Trail, which my friend came up with just because he liked the video game Oregon Trail, and we played some shows. And then me, Chris, and all these kids that were in like these pretty cool screamo bands started a band called Still We Sleep, which was like, I guess like what's that band called? They're like techie and British and metalcore.
Enter Shikari?
Yeah, there was an Enter Shikari ripoff band.
That's also really sick.
Yeah, and I didn't write any of the music for it. I just wrote like some vocal melodies and lyrics. But it was all of the work of this one dude, Kurt. But then all of them were going to like help me revamp Oregon Trail, which was going to be a pop rock band. But then it ended up being just Chris and then our friend Zach, who was also making pop rock stuff. And then Sam ended up being our drummer, and Sam had never played drums before in a band. So this was the first project for him. And Sam had just only been in like metalcore and grindcore bands in high school. Yeah. And when we started, we were also a straight edge band. And then that stopped pretty much when we were writing It Never Goes Out.
And
that just confirms what I've been saying all along, that it all comes from hardcore. Yeah.
Yeah, hardcore came before pop punk. So like when I was in 8th or 9th grade, every band was a hardcore band. And then this is basically how our scene was affected. Every band was a hardcore band, and then Fireworks started touring through, and everyone in the hardcore scene was wearing Fireworks like sweatshirts, and then everyone wanted to start a pop punk band. Also, 4 Year Strong is from Worcester, so like 4 Year Strong was like this, like middle point between hardcore and like Newfound Glory. So
easycore.
Yeah. So those were the two main influences, I think, on the scene that started people making pop punk. But I had just always been making like pop rock music. So then I just was like, all your bands are bad. I'm gonna make a better, cooler pop punk band. And that's what Hotelier was.
That's so sick. I love how like in certain interviews you can see the roots of that too. Like I remember reading one where you shouted out "Last Lights," and I was like, "Yeah, that's like Boston hardcore."
Not even Boston. They were all from
right.
Central Massachusetts. They were more Worcester than they were Boston.
Shit.
And
okay.
so, and there was actually really, as far as I know, no Boston scene. Also, it was like.
Whoa.
It was like Central Mass or it was Merrimack Valley. And then like, I guess it was also what's that? There's like a southeastern area of Massachusetts kind of near the Cape that had a scene as well where like Half-Hearted Hero was from. But for the most, as far as I knew, it was like Central Mass and Merrimack Valley. And Merrimack Valley was where like the hardcore scene was, where like Anchors Up and like Edge Day is held every year and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say that like Hotelier kind of came about as a reaction to all these like hardcore kids starting pop punk bands, and you just feeling like the songwriting wasn't like going far enough?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I had always just written that style of music, and like we definitely I've described that most of my like starting to write was just like most of the effort that I put into it was motivated by me just being like, okay, I'm unenthused. I think this is bad. I am going to try to do it better. I guess. Yeah.
I mean, I saw a lot of those early tours and like shows where with that band Born Without Bones, and like that band is like a really good example of like, you know, like they're like poppy, but it's also like something to chew on.
Yeah.
So that like makes a lot of sense too that you were buddies with them.
Scott, well, there was just crossover also at that time. So Scott has always the person who writes mainly for Born Without Bones has always sort of been the Hotelier's fifth member. Okay. He just sort of like understood what we were doing and liked it. And I was also in the original lineup for Born Without Bones. So I was playing bass in Born Without Bones when they started. And so when we would go on those tours, it would be like Scott, it would be like we'd play Hotelier set, and then we'd play as Scott's band also on some of those tours.
Cool.
Yeah.
So going into Home Like No Place Is There, previously you had It Never Goes Out, and I feel like that record was a little bit more along the lines of like Ladderman. That's sort of like really anthemic, melodic punk sound, like not quite pop punk, but not quite like straight up punk.
Yeah.
And I feel like you can still sort of see some of that in Home Like No Place, but there was like a big shift towards something that was maybe a little bit more atmospheric and a little bit more like angular. Was that just kind of like the natural evolution of the songwriting, or was there like a specific influence to that?
Well, yeah, it was just about the way that the albums were written. If you were to listen to the demos of It Never Goes Out, a lot of them, like it would sound actually more like Home Like No Place Is There than It Never Goes Out ended up sounding like. So there would be songs that I had like Our Lives Would Make a Sad Boring Movie was much slower, and like the way that the chords were structured was actually so that it felt, I think, a lot bigger, but we just changed it because we would like bring an idea to the band, and the band would like restructure the song, and like, yeah, Chris and I were really into Ladderman, and like a lot of the other members were just like didn't know that much about like emo, I guess, or weren't listening to that much emo, and were mostly listening to like D4 and Ladderman, and so then the albums just started sounding that way, or like that album started sounding that way. And then Home Like No Place Is There was actually written because like nobody I think we had all like moved or something. Like we were all just living in different places, and I was sort of like, okay, if I don't write this record, we just won't have a second Hotelier record. So I ended up writing most of Home Like No Place Is There, and then bringing it to the band. And because I had much more touch on that record, it just ended up sounding like It Never Goes Out maybe would have sounded a little bit more like. But it was also just a darker record, and the songs just sort of matched that. And it was just a progression of what I was doing on some of the songs on It Never Goes Out, but yeah, not all of them.
Right. Like, I feel like Night Rats Club on It Never Goes Out is kind of like the natural precursor to a lot of the themes that went into Home, like with regards to, talking about mental health or other themes like gender, and even like the approach to politics seems a little bit more conceptual than the grassroots community stuff that was going on in like our lives.
Yeah, and in our lives is not even it's just about where I was at the time. Like It Never Goes Out was written when I was in high school, and I was reading tons of crime think. And like when every day I'm like confronting teachers about like what anarchism is and like how this structure that I'm like living in every day is not fair, then it's more like youthful and more like rebellious and more like middle finger to the face or whatever. But like Home Like No Place Is There is like post me graduating and like seeing like then like sort of maintaining relationships and sort of all of us figuring out what we're doing with our lives. It's much more existential time for all of us, and that's sort of like the inspiration for what all of the content's about. So like while like It Never Goes Out, it's like, yeah, we're gonna change the world, and then Home Like No Place Is There is like, oh damn, this is harder than we thought.
Right.
Yeah.
It became much more like personal is political, I think.
Yes.
I feel like every article that was coming out as Home was coming out, and it kept linking to your Tumblr post that ended with apparently we're an emo band now, and kind of like prepping people for like the content. I don't mean to like look into that too much, but like, were you feeling a little vulnerable about one being an emo band and also just having an album with that content coming out? Like, was that feeling like that could be like alienating to fans of the band or anything?
No, because we didn't have that many fans, and I didn't feel like I owed them anything.
Sure.
Because we were still just having fun with it. I think that was just like sort of tongue in cheek, just like not like apparently we're an emo band now, but it was just like apparently we're an emo band now, So like, and I think at the time it was like we were included on. It was like I wrote that after BuzzFeed made us on the first ever like internet music media post about bands of our genre was 2013. BuzzFeed did a thing that was like 10 bands you should listen to if you're desperately missing emo bands or something like that. And we were on it, and that got a lot of traction, and that like allowed us to have momentum going into Home Like No Place Is There. So it was like kind of responding to that and kind of responding to the actual content of the record, which was much more an emo record than It Never Goes Out. Yeah.
I guess getting into like when the album comes out, can you tell us like the official story about the album art? I think somewhere said that it was photoshopped, and I don't know if that was true or not. And then some people said like you got busted when you were going to paint that shit on the house.
Yeah. So all of this is true. So I'll just give you the whole story.
Sweet.
Zach, the member of our band that we had started it with, the person who was also writing pop songs, we had done some tours prior to Home Like No Place Is There with Born Without Bones and with State Lines, which was the pre-Oso Oso band. And Zach was just having a miserable time. Zach was 2 years younger than us, had dropped out of high school to start touring with us, and just was having just a real hard mental time playing, small shows. He was the most like, I want to be a career musician than all of us. So like getting to go on tour and then realizing that it's like not glamorous, and that he like quit school to do this sort of not glamorous stuff, I think was coming down hard on him, plus a lot of life stuff. So he quit, and in 2013, I had sort of come up with this idea for an album art and thought Zach's house was like the best house to do it on. But Zach specifically, also because Zach's house had been foreclosed on by a bank. So we were just like, all right, this house belongs to no one besides the bank. Like, this would be sick. Let's do it. So we got a bunch of like washable kids paint, and I borrowed my friend Allie's dad's ladder and like brought it to my house, and then woke up at 3 a.m., walked like a mile with all of this stuff to get to Zach's house, and then just started painting on it because we wanted to take the shot at sunrise. So I did paint the words on the front of the house. I had sort of researched, at the time, I forget if I had already lived in a squat at this point, but I had done some research on squats in the U.S. and like the ways in which squatters are protected. So like I knew that if the police showed up, I could just tell them the last owner and they wouldn't know that the house was foreclosed on. So like the police showed up and were like, hey, the neighbors are complaining about this. What's up? And I was just like, oh, it's my friend's house. And then he was like, okay, who's the owner? And I was like, Leona Shaw. And he's like, all right, you're fine to do this. Just take it down when you're done. And we were like, okay. So he just did it. And then, but like we didn't finish it in time for sunrise. So we had to leave it overnight, and the police got even more mad, and the neighbors got even more mad, and Zach's mom, I guess, got mad. But Zach was cool with us doing it. Zach said we could do it, and like kind of didn't tell me that his mom was mad. But was just, I guess, frustrated that the neighbors were just calling her, being like, what the hell are you doing? Because it's like suburban part of
like homeowners association land.
Yeah, just like people are just like disturbed. If people are disturbed by like the sort of what's the break the sort of spell of suburbia, then they're going to be disturbed when there's like paint on the front of the house. So yeah, and then the police called us the next day. They're like, you have to take this down. So we took a bunch of shots the next morning and then washed it off. And then we looked at the photos, which were taken in film camera with like I don't remember the millimeters of cameras, but a small one. And it didn't come out good at all. We were like, damn. So then we went back with a medium format camera that we took with film, and did end up photoshopping the text from the last house on to that one. So it's like, yes, we did it. And also, yes, the album art, the album art that is the official album art is photoshopped, because we just couldn't do it again. We actually called the police and were like, hey, yeah, we did the painting on the house. We're going to do it again. And they like called us back and they were like, we know that your friends don't own the house anymore. So if you do that, we're just going to arrest you. And we're like, okay, sounds good. We're not going to do it. So we just took a photo of it and had to Photoshop it. Yeah.
And now people like to visit that house.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone emailed us and we're like, hey, I'm going to be in town. I want to visit it. And I refuse to tell people. Like, people can figure it out, but they won't find out from me. Even though the people that live there are like super sweet. Here's a great story about the people who live there, actually. So the photo was taken by my friend Matthew Laverne, who is like went to high school with us. Is actually the reason that I found out about all the bands that I know, like emo and indie rock stuff, because he was the older cousin of like my best friend in high school who introduced me to all this music. So he's responsible for me even being into music the way I am. Yeah, he was at a bar having a drink, and he's sitting next to this guy. He's like, yeah, I just bought a house in Charlton. And he's like, oh, cool, where? And he named the road, and he was like, oh, damn. Did you buy the white house on the corner? And he was like, yeah. He's like, oh my God. And it was this dude, just like, he was just sitting next, the dude who took the photo was sitting next to the dude who just bought the house, the NoPlace Is There house. And he was like, yo, I have a crazy story to tell you, and told us all about it. And he was like, wow, that's really relieving to know, because all of the neighbors were like coming over and telling us that like our house might get vandalized, and like we were kind of freaked out, but this like makes so much more sense. So that was cool. And then when the album came out and I had the album art, I went over and I like gave them a copy and was like, hey, I heard that you met Matthew. Just wanted to like introduce myself and let you know that your house is like on this album that's doing pretty well. And they were really sweet about it. And like, I've heard that people have visited the house and they've like come out and like showed them the record and like talked about the record with them, and they've been like really sweet about it. But I don't want to push it too much on them. And yeah.
That's really cute.
Yeah.
Extremely cute. I have a dumb question. Why did you make?
I think I already know the answer.
Like, why did you decide to make NoPlace one word? Because I've never like seen it that way or anything.
Yeah, just because it would then be there's no place like home backwards. Otherwise, it would just be there's place no like home.
Okay.
Backwards, and that doesn't make as much sense. Also, just stylistically, it looked cooler. Yeah.
Did you know that, Ali? Is that
I
what
did.
you thought? Okay.
Yeah. It's similar to like when everyone was like, "Yo, your deep rest. That's you're depressed, man."
Yeah.
Like,
what a mistake on my
like
part. Jade from Osa Osa said, "Yo, when I heard that, I thought, wow, that sucks."
I always liked it. I thought it was just like kind of this like deadpan wordplay inserted into an otherwise very real song, and I thought that added a little bit of like much needed levity to an album that was sometimes like crushingly sad. So I always liked it. But
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, I think it's not the most it's just like ham fist poet kind of stuff that I don't know that I get is really corny. So I don't really have thoughts any which way I wrote it. I don't know.
So the singles are coming out. I remember like I think Housebroken was premiered on AV Club.
Sounds right.
And other places were doing like huge premieres, and it just seemed like the worlds were colliding, and this was going to be like a much bigger release than anyone who was following the band or the scene in general could have anticipated. Was that something you were like aware of at the time, or conscious of?
Chris says we were. I don't remember. I think that there was like I remembered feeling like there's potential for this to do well, and I think this record's really good. And like specifically at the time, because we were just straight like Central Mass scene band, like everybody that was hearing the record ahead of time was just like, fuck, this is huge. And I was like, thank you, that's nice. But I don't know, I didn't anticipate that. Like I don't know what I expected, but it definitely was nice when it started doing well. Housebroken initially I think came out as like a solo video that I had done, and I don't know if AV Club released that. I think the singles were we started with The Scope of All This Rebuilding, and then Your Deep Rest, and then Life and Drag. But Housebroken might have come out right before the whole album came out. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think that sounds right, because Housebroken was the first song from the record that I heard, so I think that makes sense.
Okay.
And then by the time it's out, Needledrop and Pitchfork are putting out reviews for it. Kyle, I didn't realize this, but Kyle pointed out that the Genius.com entry on the album is like insanely active. Like if you go and look at the annotations, they're just like miles long.
That's cool. I've never checked that out, actually. That's sweet.
Well, there's people like correcting each other too.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's like really nerdy, but it's also like interesting to like watch people like try and like one up each other with like, oh, but in this thing Christian said this.
Here's the true deeper meaning. Yeah. I feel like just like from my read of you through these like 38 minutes, Christian, that you're the type of person who feels like any interpretation of art is like valid, but how does it make you feel to have like so many people projecting their own personal feelings onto the album, considering it's such a personal record?
Yeah, I mean that's that's what makes the big bucks, to BH. I'm just kidding. Like to be honest, like I feel good that like enough people are like the songs are good enough that people feel as though they can like sort of what happens with music, specifically pop music, is you write a song that sort of like mesmerizes and hypnotizes in a way, like that's what pop structure does. It like has tension and release, and I actually think that there's probably some strong similarity between that and hypnotism. And then you have like the listener in this state to like whatever they're feeling when you've sort of locked them in is now what the song means to them. And because they're in their own mind having this experience with the album. So like it's inevitable, and I can't expect that anything else would happen. And like the process of me writing those songs was just like me an expulsion of like feelings of things. So like when it's out, I don't imagine it's like mine anymore. So it all just feels like the natural thing that would happen.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the reason that y'all stopped playing Housebroken live, right? Mm-hmm. Because people were interpreting it to be about domestic abuse when it was ostensibly a political song.
Yeah, I think that was the worst written song. Like there was like some, I forget who it was, some podcast that like wanted to just shit on it for whatever reason, and they were like, look, this band's like a piece of shit, they call women dogs. And I was like, okay, that's not the point. But
what?
Yeah, I just didn't care. But then like someone sent it to me, and then I like found them on Twitter and was like, hey, if you want to talk to me about the song, like I'm willing to talk about it. I don't think you're right about like this interpretation. And then they were just like, whoa, a name searcher, you searched your name on Twitter and like and then found us. Like what a self-absorbed human you are. And I was just like, all right, you guys are miserable humans.
That's so fucking gross. Wow.
It doesn't matter. Like they just sucked. But but like, yeah, it was that. And then it was like the combination of just like we had, I mean, it was a weird situation, but there are these people, these fans of ours whose opinion we looked up to, and they had a problem with it. And so we were just like, all right, you have a problem with it. We were really attempting, specifically me, was really attempting to like balance the gift of being like a person with power in the music scene, and a person who like people are giving social capital to, and handling that like as responsibly as I possibly could, because just like in that time there was just a lot of there was not a lot of, but there was like bands who were apolitical and didn't care, and I thought that was annoying. And then there were bands that were political, and whenever they were like confronted about something that they did that was kind of sucky, they would just ignore it or like take super offense to it. And it was just like,
you don't get it.
Yeah. And it was frustrating. So it was just like frustrating to see nobody do it right. And then like also be involved in like activist scenes where a lot of us were thinking about power all the time. And I just had a lot of people that, you know, were there beside me to help me think about how to be semi-famous within a subgenre of a, you know, like the subgenre of a subgenre or whatever. And just like really handle the role of being like having a public persona and do it responsibly. So yeah, that was just a decision that I had made where I was just like, okay, this fan has a problem with this song. The things I could do are like, the options are like ignore that person because I have the power to be able to, or like give power to a fan to have control, have some sort of control over a project that they are emotionally invested in. So I just made the decision because, one, I thought that song sucked already and was like a hiccup on the record, and two, because like it had harmed some people and made other people feel, I don't know, uneasy about it's just like poorly worded metaphor or whatever, or allegory. So I just was like, yeah, not gonna play it.
Thank you for. That was a really in-depth response. I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah. I just felt like it just felt too easy to be able to say, well, all these other people like it, so I'm not gonna. But like, it just felt like if it's a gray area, either decision is right. So let's just do the one that like makes some people long and other people better, instead of making some people harm and other people happy. Feels like longing
Right.
plus someone not being harmed is better than happy and other people being harmed.
That's always been one of my favorites on the record, but that response really kind of like illuminated why you made that decision. So I appreciated it.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to do track by track?
Yeah.
Okay, so an introduction to the album. I feel like, one of the strongest decisions, production-wise, that was made about this album was, instead of having that atmospheric build and then just immediately going into kind of like something more explosive, you start out with just the voice and the guitar cutting through the mix. And in a lot of ways, because that goes on for so long, I feel that makes it more powerful than if you just went through all guns blazing. Was that the way the song was written, like from the get-go?
Yeah, I guess so. I just once messed up trying to play Blackbird, and then that song was written, and I was just like, this sounds like the first song on a record, and then it became the first song on the record. That's sort of how it came to be. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot about in album writing. I think about pacing, and I think about how you lead somebody into the record, and the first song on the record starting that way is like a sort of like disruptive thing for the listener, and sometimes disrupting the listener's expectations is often like a important tool. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways in which I couldn't explain album writing when I was writing Home Like NoPlace Is There that I could by the end of writing Goodness. So I sort of just like, a lot of this is just like I intuitively thought this is a great way to start the record, and now I can sort of put words to why that is, I think. But yeah.
There's like one moment on the lyric sheet of this song that I feel kind of put me in like the headspace for the album. It's the line, "Will show me the honest, proper way to disarm predatory gaze."
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a turning point, because a lot of bands in the genre kind of write from the perspective of an underdog, and I feel like with this line, the Hotelier was establishing itself as a band that was writing from the point of view of someone with the power to protect the underdog. And I think that is a lot of the reason why people latch on so heavily to this record.
Huh. Never thought of that. Cool.
Oh, word.
Yeah.
Kyle, do you have thoughts on this song?
I mean, there's no better opener. I think one thing that people all love is the exclamatory "fuck." Was that like off the cuff?
Yeah, I think a lot on that record I was just playing with like the room that we were in for vocals was small, and I just really liked like room mic sound. So I think the like my voice like sort of falls away from the mic, and then I scream into the room, and I just thought that was it just pleased my ears, so I just did it. I think.
Yeah, I mean, and like people post to our emo all the time, and like, what's your favorite like one-liner or like line in a song? And people say, "I slept for years on end." Fuck, like it. I can't imagine with it without it there. So yeah,
it's funny. Yeah. There's going back. There's my Instagram's private, but if you go back pretty far, in my Instagram. There's like a video from that somebody took at a show we played on our first tour, and nobody knew that song yet. And because nobody knew the song yet, I wasn't saying fuck because it just sounds funny if I just do it myself. So there was this person that was like singing really out of key, and then the song drops, and they're the only person in the room. They go fuck. Yeah, it's just a pretty funny video that I have that I should find a way to get off Instagram.
So the song kind of builds to this huge climax. You know, the instrumentals come in, and it ends with I had a chance to construct something beautiful, and I choked. And this is like when you push your voice to the breaking point for like the first time on the record. And I feel like that moment just provides so much momentum going into the next song, which is like much more like fast-paced and anthemic.
Mm-hmm.
So what specifically do those last lines mean?
It's a response to It Never Goes Out as an album, sort of, where it's like it's a response. It's like a setting a tone of the difference between It Never Goes Out and Home Like No Place Is There. Like there's this like momentum from It Never Goes Out, which is sort of like we're going to change the world and we're going to like create something beautiful. And then the end line of the first song to set the tone for Home Like No Place Is There is to say, I choked. This is not that. This is not that mood. This mood is different. This mood is like the fallout of believing in that idea. Yeah. And
I just want to say the genius annotation is like so off then.
And I like that. So with that interpretation in mind, leading right into you cut our ropes and left the umbilical.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that kind of thematic like connection, basically like cutting yourself free from the past record. That makes it like way more powerful in context. Damn.
Yeah.
I feel like the placement of every song on this record feels very deliberate, and having a slow opener followed by like a total fucking like barnstormer like scope, real strong choice.
Cool.
I also feel like this is like one of the more pop punk songs on the record, if that makes sense.
Word. It was actually so like the member. I also for a long time thought it was the best song on the record, but that was the one song I think of that I can think of the ones of the songs on the album that Chris wrote the music for. So that makes sense. Chris is the person that was more pop punk and like in punk and hardcore bands before Hotelier. So he wrote the instrumentals for that song, and that's probably why. Yeah.
Word.
I really like the noticeable like guitar leads on this one. They're like played on like the lower strings, and like the tones are like really punchy and stuff. That's one of my favorite parts about this song. And like the kind of like the call and response sort of like gang vocal thing going on too is, I think that's also kind of like a pop punk thing too, that because I also thought this was like a pop punk song.
Yeah, I think that's like sort of a thing about pop punk that I appreciated a lot was gang vocals. And I thought that they could be done corny and they could feel like some British pub vibe, but there's some like sense of camaraderie within that I think is powerful. That is like an appealing aspect of pop punk to me. So I used it a lot on that record, but I was trying to always use it in a way that didn't feel like a British pub, and always sort of that just had the vibe of that, but had the vibe. I don't know. Had a different vibe, the way that I wanted it to be, the way that I wanted group vocals to feel.
Sick. The one line when you forgot the words to our song, when you can't remember names, it's been too long. Are those lines outwardly directed or self-directed?
Let me think, because I haven't thought about the words to this album in a while. Oh yeah, no, they're outwardly directed, I think. Funny thing about this song, there was I think it was Noisy did an interview with Chris Caraba, and it was like of Dashboard, and he was like, Chris Carrabba of Dashboard listens to new emo bands and tells us what he thinks. And Chris Carrabba.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Carrabba listened to this song and couldn't tell that this song started with a chorus. And he just, because he was so used to like the verse has to be the first thing, but the song does kind of start with a chorus and then goes into a verse and then goes into a chorus. And he was like, this is a weird song because the verse is more punchier than the chorus. And I was just like, that's because the chorus starts the song. Yeah, it was just like a weirdly structured song, but yeah, it was just funny that it was just a funny take from like somebody who's like I would consider like obviously a professional songwriter. Yeah.
That's also really cute. And then obviously we go to In Framing, which I think one of the main reasons the song is interesting is because it feels fast-paced, but it also feels a lot more subdued. Mm-hmm. So coming after, kind of like a more punchy song, it simultaneously like keeps the momentum going while like taking the intensity down a notch. Mm-hmm. And then the decision to like add in that acoustic guitar lower in the mix. What was that like? Was that a studio thing, or?
Well, this is a song that I remembered when I wrote this song. I remember having an NV3 when I wrote this song, but I was in my room staying up super late. It was like 5 a.m. or something, and the sun had just started to come up. And then I wrote that, and I was really stoked on exactly what you were just describing, where it's just fast, but it's subdued. And I had to I ran down to my basement so that I wouldn't wake anybody up, and I was playing it on an acoustic guitar. So I think in my head just heard it on an acoustic guitar. And when we were recording it, like it didn't sound like palm mutes. It sounded like strumming, like acoustic guitar. So I just wanted to do that at some point. It just, the palm muting itself didn't sound right. Yeah.
This might be a very, very weird comparison, but fast paced mixed with subdued. Like the vibe it kind of reminds me of is the song Breaking the Habit by Linkin Park.
Sick.
Like, yeah. I didn't know whether you would think it was like weird to hear that comparison, but
yeah. That makes sense. I know what you're talking about. It's a vibe that lots of musicians use probably at some point or another, and you find, and it's generally a song that like at least perks my ears when it's like fast and subdued. It's there's a song on the Tegan and Sara album Sainthood, The Ocean, that does the same thing. It's fast paced and subdued, and I really like that song.
Right. And I also think here is the part of the album where kind of like broader influences start coming out. Like, I remember reading a lot of reviews of this album that were comparing it to the Weaker Thans, and this is like one of the first songs that kind of like piqued that vibe for me. Was that a conscious influence?
Oh yeah, it's one of the few bands that we all agreed upon liking, and yeah, it's just the general wordiness of the Weaker Thans was something that was an influence on me and sort of made me feel like, okay, this is cool. Like, not all choruses need to be choruses. Not all choruses need to repeat. We don't need and I was always frustrated with that I couldn't fit enough words in a song anyway. And I was always worried that our music would come off as too poppy. So something that the Weaker Thans taught me that you can do is you can stop your songs from being too poppy by making them less accessible by being more wordy. And I wanted to keep a distance from being too accessible, because then you lose depth, or you lose the ability for somebody to enter to the depth of your music. And like, there are bands that I know that are super deep and make really deep, incredible songs, but because they sound I would maybe take that back, but like there are ways in which you can lose the bridge of depth that somebody takes from like listening to a song the first time and being like, oh, this sounds cool, to like going on Genius and saying like, no, this song's about this because I've listened to it 10,000 times. So I was always looking for a way to bridge that. Yeah.
Word. And of course, you know, the subdued song is followed by the anthem of the record. How do you feel about the fact that Your Deep Rest is kind of like, quote unquote, the song? Like,
Didn't expect it, I think. Mostly because
it's so dark?
No, because it uses some chords that I never intuitively use. Kind of the like the like the vibe, like it makes sense when it resolves with the chorus, but like I didn't think the verse was like appealing, and so I didn't think it would be a good song or a song that people liked. And then it was just like the hit, so it's like, okay, whatever. Yeah, but yeah, it is dark. It's a dark song. It's about well, I guess I don't know that I should say what I feel like it's about. I always wonder if I should, but I had a suicidal partner at the time, and sort of every day sort of felt like I could wake up and she'd be dead, and so it was like basically me like sort of like spilling out the thoughts that I was like, okay, this could happen at any point, and this is how it's going to play out when it does. So luckily, I mean, she's great now. She lives like a very good life, and like super happy for her. But yeah, it was a real rough time, and taught me a lot about how to support people, because I was in some ways enabling it and didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in that situation before, and I've also like lost a lot of friends. Like a bit earlier this year, I lost a really good friend of mine, Matt from Darkle, and this is, you know, one of those songs that I feel like really captures that feeling with a sense of authenticity. So it's interesting to hear that it's almost like creative nonfiction.
Yeah, it just felt so real. Like it felt like I was like there was like a month period where I was just like, all right, like it's gonna, like one day I'm just gonna wake up and I sort of have to prepare myself for that. And so it felt entirely real. And you know, it didn't happen, and it wasn't it wasn't going to be a surprise if it happened. And so it felt just entirely real. Yeah.
Right. And one of the lyrics on this song that I feel gets overlooked, but I think kind of hits at a core part of the experience, is a conscious erasure of working class background where despair trickles down. I feel like that's something that not enough people talk about in songs. When you come from poverty, the fact that depression is extremely hard to treat because you either don't have the ability to diagnose it or you don't have the ability to treat it. So, sorry,
yeah, it also just is like a point to say, like, I could see why this person was depressed, and a lot of it had to do with, or maybe we could just say a lot of it was exacerbated exactly by the fact that her family was working class. It didn't feel like at that time, at like that period in the world, like depression was just like, no, it is not a socially, it's not a thing that you are conditioned into. It is just a chemical imbalance, which is like, it's obviously a chemical imbalance, like initiated by all these other like life circumstances. Like, to me, it seems pretty obvious that like depression, while it can be maybe purely
chemical.
Yeah. It seems so clearly also linked to class and oppression and
quality of life. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So in this person's particular situation, it was so clearly that
yeah. I just love the tying together of the themes of intense political analysis and intense personal experience in the song. I feel like that's what really makes it like stick out for me personally. I would really like to clarify, I called in sick from your funeral, because I've heard people say that it's like the funeral made you so upset that you called out from work, but I always interpret it as you couldn't bear to go to the funeral, so you called out sick from it, like metaphorically.
There's some word issues maybe in that sentence, which I would love to ignore because, but yeah, it's the latter in this case. When I wrote it, it was the latter. But don't tell anybody.
Bleep it out.
Yeah.
Then might have learned how to swim, never taught how to drown.
That's I think the most important line in the song. Yeah.
Exactly. Is that I always interpreted that as, you were never taught how to deal with like the most difficult times in your life because society doesn't condition people to be able to handle situations like this.
Yeah, it's just a commentary about how we talk about mental illness and how it's talked about, how it's diagnosed. It's better now. It's definitely different now. But it seemed like only the super left were talking about that.
Right.
Like mental illness as something that wasn't also tied into politics. And it felt completely wrong to me that was the case.
Damn, that was ahead of the time.
I
had a lot of smart people around me when I was writing this record.
I just wanted to squeeze in here that like that like little line there was like a pretty good example of how like you can write something that's 2 lines that has tons of meaning behind it, and how like some lyricists need to write like an entire song, but like you can condense something into 2 lines. It's just, I really admire that because it seems like more lyrical than like journaling and call those lyrics. Like, how did you practice that, or like was it just something that you were going for this whole time? And
I mean, with my method, it's just like I'm saying enough things that one of them is going to be probably pretty good. There are better bands that do that thing better, where they say very little and are able to capture so much with that. That I think they don't add the filler, and I like admire that more sometimes. But I think it's just a case of I'm saying so much that eventually I will say something right. But also it's just the way my brain works. I don't think of it as a particularly special skill. It's kind of annoying to people sometimes, or at least at the time. Like I had dated somebody where they would like describe what's going on in their brain. Like we would just stay up all night and talk about what's going on in this person's brain, and I would help like contextualize it. And they would say something and I'd be like, oh, that's like this other like thing that happens in the world. And my brain just sort of goes to that. I don't know if it's because like, I don't know. I don't know. My brain just is always thinking about complex systems in the world. And it's part of it's just like being a Taoist, I think, where like I'm thinking about like the world is organized in natural rhythms, and that there are certain like complex systems that are recreated in different areas of the world, and trying to connect how those things work so that you can address them the same way. And so my brain just is constantly seeing like networks of things, and then just like seeing them again and being like, oh, that's just that. So yeah, I think that helped me write, despite never in my life had I been a writer. Like my poetry is all really bad, and like the creative writing that I've done is not very good at all, and somehow my lyrics came out well.
And like I think that's just, I don't know, I always think of the Wonder Years as a band that writes, it just takes them a million words to make one point. And I feel like that like one line that we're just talking about, like that would have been like an album. Like it would have taken them like entire album to make that point. And like that's great. Like they're really good at that style. So it's just like a matter of style and preference and taste.
Right.
Yeah, I try to not, despite being as wordy as I am, I try to not say the same thing twice. I don't know if that worked or not, but I'd try.
I think it worked. I think it allows you to address a lot of different ideas in one song without like spilling over thematically. So I don't know if this record was consciously made with like vinyl in mind, but Among the Wildflowers feels like a perfect side one closer.
Yeah, it wasn't made with vinyl in mind. I didn't have any vinyl before this record came out, so.
So I feel like the guitar line on this song is like probably the most like achingly like melodic moment on the record, and I like this song just as much as anything else, but it feels like kind of I wouldn't say that it doesn't fit in, because it does, but it feels like the reason it stands out is because it has like this much more melodic structure to it.
Yeah, the chorus is a chorus in that song, and it's the first one where it is, I think, where it's like purely a repeated chorus, and it's just like, let's see, I think the first song on the record, no, maybe not. So my friend Ryan, who plays in this band Crying, was saying that if you take there's a ton of Hotelier songs where you just like play them with different instruments at different velocities, and it's just a country song. That's one of them. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Two things lyrically in this song. One, post Shakespearean skull, solid Hamlet reference.
Yeah.
Why did you put this line in the song?
Oh, honestly, at this point, I don't know. I couldn't tell you right now. I'd have to like reread the lyrics and then like think a lot about what I was trying to say. Because I mean, a lot of this, because I mean, a lot of this is like a lot of the way that I wrote lyrics for this album and Goodness was meditate on an idea, then like sleep deprive myself, and then write kind of stream of consciousness to like a set cadence. And so like a line like that would just be like, a lot of lines I can't like particularly explain. I can just be like, well, I wrote that. That's pretty cool. So I would just have to sit with it for a second, and I would have, for some lines, I would have just as much of an opinion as y'all would, because it just like feels so disconnected from what I was attempting to do, maybe because I was just like kind of like trying to like, I don't know. Yeah.
Right. Well, the reason I asked was because I feel like the first four songs are kind of building up to like a tragedy in the Shakespearean sense.
Okay.
And then the back half of the record is kind of like mulling over the fallout of it. And I think that this line is kind of I mean, my creative writing teacher in like my freshman year of college would have called it a signpost. Just like giving you a clue as to how the rest of the album is going to play out.
Yeah.
And it also ties into, killing the self as to protect it from harm, because the character of Hamlet is intensely suicidal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're more right than I would say. That's cool.
Oh, sick.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, again, like a lot of this is just like, I don't know. Yeah, that sounds right. And I'm not just like, maybe I'm just like being like, oh, that sounds cooler than what maybe it is. But that does sound right. Like I do a little bit of foreshadow, because I know how the record goes. Like I think of the record in terms of like arc before I write it. So I do a bit of foreshadowing on all the albums when it comes to the lyrics, sometimes without even realizing it. But yeah.
Yeah. Which is cool, because I mean, as of now we have a few more, but at the time this album came out, this was like one of the few like true concept records in the genre. So I think it's cool that you were like conscious of it in that sense. And then would you mind talking a little bit about the end of the song, the what would you do if someone hurt your best friend's feelings?
Yeah. This is like an attempt at this album was really obsessed with the natural, and like talking about like how our natures have been diverted by the environments in which we've grown up. So the concept of that discussion was to take a child and then ask them their opinion about a subject that with adults is confusing, and then have them answer it in a way that was like quote unquote more natural. So like this was like at a time where again, like abuse in leftist circles was being talked about a lot. So the point for me was like, and like within those circles, there is just like a lot of discussion about like, does this count as abuse? What is abuse? You know, are the police abuse? Is the state abuse? And there was like just a lot of discourse around abuse. And so I was just like, this isn't that complicated. Like, let's ask a child. So yeah, it was me, my sibling, and my sibling's husband having a like interview. Like an interview that was just one of the questions that I asked in the interview, and I just like had this like questions that like started easy and then like rose in intensity and then came out easy again, so that I could like get some good nuggets, and that was one of the nuggets that I felt conceptually fit with the record.
Hell yeah. I think it's real cool that you talked about like the naturalism aspect, because I think that ties into chewing wildflowers to numb the pain, that kind of like homeopathic sort of thing. It ties into the naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like I make fun of my obsession with naturalism on this record with goodness, I think. And like I was sort of, I just was obsessed with it, like natural guitar sound, natural, all this other stuff, like the room noise of me shouting as opposed to me shouting it directly into a mic because I wanted to sound natural. Like I was like obsessive about it at the time. And I think it's kind of silly at this point because you're recording into like Logic Pro or whatever the hell, and none of it's like recorded to tape or anything. So I just thought, my obsession with it was silly, but that was what I was going for.
Right.
Yeah.
Sick. I think that what makes this this record quote unquote emo rather than a concept record of any other genre is like that self-awareness aspect of it too. So Life in Drag, just kind of like how I feel Wildflowers is a side A opener. This is like side A closer. This is a side B opener, like for sure.
And I think we mess with the vinyl. Like the vinyl is a little bit different than the actual record. I think it starts with like a plug-in guitar sound that we like separated into the first tracks. So when you listen to it on the vinyl, it like is a plug-in guitar sound, and then it's punching in, which I think is a silly music trick, but we did it.
Well, isn't there a guitar? Isn't there like a guitar unplugging in the first song at the end of it, or no? There's some song that ends with a guitar being unplugged.
There's a lot of guitar noise that was edited poorly on that record, so there could be like guitars just drop out before the song's done. Like
friend of the pod, Josh, listened to this song and then messaged me to say I think Christian should front a hardcore band. This is the quote unquote screamo song of the record. So this is my personal favorite song on the album, partially because of the sound and partially because of the theme. Was there a reason that you decided to like put something so kind of like objectively heavy here, like in this spot on the track list?
Yeah, it only makes sense if you do it in the middle.
Right.
So like an album. Depending on where you're at in an album, you get away with certain things, and if you put it at a different part in the album, you can't get away with it. So like, for example, like the Alex G album Rocket does the same thing, where it's like you couldn't. I don't know if you've listened to that record, but there's a song called Brick.
Yeah.
You could not put Brick anywhere else in the record besides in the dead middle because like the listener won't be able to contextualize what it is doing. So you sort of led into it like by the screaming at the end of Among the Wildflowers, and then the other things that have come before it that allow you to scream, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it follows like kind of the album's like ostensible centerpiece, like Wildflowers is dead in the middle of the track list, and then this song is right after that, and Wildflowers is extended, and this is like punchy and to the point. I think that adds a lot to it too. My favorite just word in the song is gender fucked. Like I started using that word immediately after I listened to it.
Yeah.
And
I learned it from Hampshire College kids.
sick. I always felt like the song was, I mean, now in the genre, I think a lot more people are talking openly about the way they experience gender, but prior to this, no one had ever really like put it front and center as like the main subject of a song, and I felt like that had to have been like an extremely conscious choice, just in aspect like visibility.
Well, yeah, it's partially that. It's also just like a song literally about me being in drag. Like the actual subject of the song was I went to a party and I was in drag, and my best friend from high school, who was like totally a sissy boy when we were in high school, went to like woodworking school and came back like a total like chiseled upstate New York bro, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like I was just like, how did like us both being like total sissies in high school become like this exact opposite direction? And that was sort of a song about my own interaction with gender, sort of in a sense, but not too much, but like I don't know, it's also like maybe an iffy conversation point to say, like calling it life and drag, and I've had some conversations about that, but it's not necessarily about being trans, but it is about just sort of like the performance of gender, and like that night specifically was like, whoa, like yeah, this is not this person that I used to know, and thus like this is such a weird, felt like a song, it felt like a story, like felt too thematic to be real. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. Like you wore the binary like a badge of fucking honor. That feels like it's a direct comment on the story that you just told.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mistook pathetic for empathy. That's a comment on toxic masculinity, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because it's immediately preceded by that "Who taught you how to hate yourself?" Like couplet, which I think is about, you know, like repressing the more feminine aspects of yourself in favor of being like a upstate New York dude, bro. I love this song too much, I think, to be able to talk about it objectively. Kyle, you gotta go.
It's the entire song is just about that specifically. It's just all it is like a song that takes place over the entire moment of me seeing this person, me walking up to them, me shaking their hand, and them calling me a fag. I was like, all right, wild. Cast a stone at the foe and the stone hit me. It was sort of like that moment, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I feel like we did talk about Housebroken kind of before we even went into the track by track.
Mm-hmm.
If even by accident. I feel like we actually covered a lot of the bases there, but Christian, do you have like maybe anything else you feel people should know about Housebroken?
I mean,
I know you said before you're like not as proud of it as you are of the rest of the album, etc.
Yeah, it was just I think it was the first song lyrically that I had written for the album. I say a lot of things about it, but like it's probably fine. Like in a lot of ways, but yeah, it's just a song about how I had seen abuse being talked about within my circles, and it in the end is a song for me about like witnessing abuse and seeing how it plays out. It doesn't really matter, like it doesn't matter to sympathize with the person doing it if it's just continued harm that is going on.
Right.
And that's sort of what I was just trying to capture with the song, and also just like, yeah, just how it can play out sometimes, in which like, you're not, it's not always also a moment in which you can help. Sometimes you just straight can't. You're sort of without your control because the person isn't desiring help, and that goes for like abuse from like a person in like a relationship to somebody who is under the abuse of the state, which is sort of the context of the song that I was trying to say. It's just like somebody who's under the abuse of the state and the abuse of a lot of the sort of systems that we set up in society, and they're not wanting to detach from that. Yeah.
So it's about abuse kind of on this broader, more systematic scale, and I mean, to me, it's not super surprising that people kind of took it on a more micro level to be about like domestic abuse, and in a way, it also is about that. I still am baffled that people thought that you were calling women dogs in this song.
Oh, the people who said that are probably just people who like wanted to have a reason to like get mad at me.
Right.
So I'm not even sure they really thought that. I just think that they like wanted to say it because it was like fun to be mad at me for whatever reason in their life.
Yeah. And as for musically, I feel like this might be the most straightforwardly within the genre of emo song on the record.
Huh.
Like, I feel like the guitar work is pretty reminiscent of like early Mineral, and it does kind of have that like build up, that like classic sense of dynamics.
Huh.
I've always thought it was like one of the brighter spots, or one of the few bright spots on the album, really, because there's like the nice little breakdowny thing that's like very clean in the middle of it.
Yeah. It has a folky feel. It has a bounce that's folky. It has like chord progression that's folky. It has an accordion solo. I think it's funny. And interesting that you hear early Mineral in it, because I wouldn't have heard that.
I do. I hear like even the breakdown that Kyle mentioned reminds me of like the beginning of Gloria a little bit. But I don't know. I might just be crazy. Honestly, my final thought on the song is that when I first listened to it, that "I'll lash out, I'll bite back" climax like really got to me. Yeah, cool. I think it's cool that in an album that's kind of focused so much on rumination of pain and analyzing it, that you still had this moment of catharsis. I feel like that was important to have like in the end of like kind of a harrowing song.
Yeah. I think a lot of the album is doomy, and that's maybe another reason why I feel like it's a hiccup in the record, just mood wise. But like again,
you wanted to keep the miserable theme, like.
Well, not that I wanted to keep the miserable theme. It's just like just to keep it cohesive with the idea, and part of the idea is like. Part of the just base like one word sentences that you could say about the part about what the record's about is just like it's harder than we can ever say it is. And I think that song still captures that. But yeah.
All right, so we're moving on to the penultimate song on the album here, Discomfort Revisited, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a sequel to Southern Discomfort. And I think Kyle, you wanted to ask this question, but it got like axed for whatever reason. But we Are All Alone was taken down from Bandcamp.
Oh yeah.
What's the story behind that?
We had just some general band discussions about like what we wanted as a band to curate as like our material, I guess. And we thought that it was a better idea to have these albums that we felt proud of than this kind of sloppy work that we started with, as like if we're gonna curate. Well, part of it's like now our entire band camp is done through this like label thing that so like Tiny Engines puts all our records up, and I guess we maybe could put up We Are All Alone, but it's basically all run through their Bandcamp. Yeah, it was sort of just a curation thought, like the fans that like We Are All Alone, or like that are really into us and want to find our older stuff and listen to it, we'll find it and they'll be able to listen to it. But we thought it was like a better way to present ourselves kind of cleanly as a band in this world where like it was moving towards where our thing was moving towards I guess being a professional band and not like a band that was a local thing, I guess. We just wanted to keep It Never Goes Out as like the beginning of our band and right. to like the larger audience. And it feels like people still forget about that record. So yeah.
So you haven't really like disowned it, but you just kind of made it a little tougher to find.
Yeah, we think yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't think it's bad. I think actually there are some songs on it that are pretty sick, but some of them are pretty silly, and yeah, and some ideas.
So like,
yeah.
Conceptually, like the hotel year ends with We Are All Alone, and then the hotelier starts with It Never Goes Out.
Yeah, I guess there's We Are All Alone, and then there was a 2-song demo, and then there was It Never Goes Out, and I guess it doesn't matter, but yeah, you could say that the hotelier begins with It Never Goes Out.
All right, so moving on to the song itself, it feels like it might be about the same person that Your Deep Rest is about, but not like in the reality sense, but more in just like a thematic sense, because it also is, despite the fact that it is like musically very melancholic and a little bit doomy, it kind of has this bittersweet, uplifting message to it, about moving on from a relationship and being able to stand and move forward on your own. Mm-hmm. And maybe like in my mind, this is kind of like an alternate reality of how the situation from Your Deep Rest could have played out.
Right. Yeah, and because you're right, it is about that person, and because as we talked about in Your Deep Rest, that person is still alive and doing well. Yeah, that song is about the same person and was sort of the reality of how it played out, as opposed to Your Deep Rest, which was sort of the like this likely could have played out this way situation. Yeah, correct.
Sick. Asked to be admitted, and they put a lock on your door. I feel like this might be less of saying that this person was institutionalized like in a material way, and more about kind of maybe hiding themselves from external forces, and that kind of ties into the later lyric about protect your pressure points that I refuse to press against. And to me, this song just it feels a lot about the lengths of a like emotional self-harm a person can go to when they don't want to deal with the problems in their own life.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd call it not wanting to deal with the problems in your own life as much as I would like sort of like what felt at the time just sort of like an inability. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Can you talk about the line project the voice that I found for you?
Ooh, interesting. Literally an actual controversial line that so like me and that person actually got in a fight about that line because I was like, yeah, I definitely worded that wrong, and they were like, yeah, made me feel bad, and I was like, I'm sorry. But I guess the idea would be better presented, project the voice that I found with you, I guess, would be better, because it sounds less like I'm saying that like I did everything for this person. Like I was like the only thing that, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, I can see how it could be, because the way it's worded, it could be like misconstrued as maybe like you propping this person up, or being the reason that they found themselves in, or something along those lines. I feel like we're both getting at the same thing.
Yeah. So that's mostly what it is. Yeah.
And then I felt weaker when I bent, beaten to the end, folding on myself, too damaged to mend. So there's this contrast that you are kind of building in these last lines, between the narrator who is bending and beaten, and then the subject who was already beaten down and is further hurting themselves by, quote, dragging from the arm. And I kind of wanted to ask you to dissect that a little bit for me, because I still am having a hard time parsing it.
Yeah, so it was just a relationship in which like it felt as though the things that I was doing weren't working. It felt as though, in a similar sense to like maybe taught how to swim, never taught how to drown. It was like I felt like I was being pulled under, and I was being like brought to this place where I was now being like harmed, and my mental state was being like pretty destroyed, like attempting to support this person, while like the closer that we came to like the same point, the easier it was becoming for that person, and yet the harder it was becoming for me. So that was part of the reality of it. And there's also just like tons of general, like most of the trauma of this situation I worked through by writing this record, but there's like just tons of trauma from that situation that like my body has endured, and like greatly affected how I engage in relationships moving forward from that, and how I think about how to support somebody who is having like a situation this rough in their lives, and like thinking about like what actions enable that, and what actions enable them to like externalize their situation onto other people in a way that harms them, and like how to set boundaries for yourself around what you can and can't engage with. So there's just like it's kind of talking about how that was sort of externalized onto me, and how like I wish them well, but can't continue to be a part of it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That kind of clears up the smudges that were around that area for me. It kind of makes it clear that the song is about sort of the search for self-empowerment that comes in a relationship after kind of breaking, maybe codependency isn't the right word, but that sort of cycle of enabling and dragging down, you know?
Yeah, and it is codependency, and it's codependency with like coupled with extreme mental illness. Yeah.
All right, so a melancholic song that, I mean, that explanation just makes it feel both more uplifting and more heartbreaking at the same time. So good work.
Yeah. That person's doing great though. Now they like run marathons and work at a bank and do cool shit.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Proud of them. So now we move into the finale of the album, Dendron. Something I think is cool about this song is that it starts off a little bit faster paced, and then it kind of has that break in the middle, and
and has this kind of like real shimmering crescendo climax sort of thing. And I feel like that was also a conscious choice to kind of end this record with a huge moment like that, something that kind of almost feels euphoric in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think part of it is that it separates like the song into being like, like the song has an outro, but the outro of the song sort of serves as like an outro to the album, just in sort of how it's separated, which is pretty nice. And yeah, the pacing of that song is pretty. I think it's cool too.
I love that couplet. We develop mental pictures and we're following our fathers down the drain, which feels kind of. I don't necessarily know if I would say that line is about toxic masculinity at first blush, but it is kind of about, you know, there's that theory of cyclical generations. The way our parents lived is mapped out onto us, and we follow kind of that structure.
Right.
And then it follows through into, do you recall the imagery from when I drove you away through others' rose prescription lens? So there's that combination of a path that's already mapped out, and then prescription lens, rather than just the phrase rose-tinted glasses, kind of implies a choice to follow those paths more than something that's unconscious.
Yeah, let's see. That sounds right. Also, I forget. I'm trying to remember exactly what I had meant by specifically adding prescription. And sometimes I think that it has to do with, because I forget, because it was 2012 or something that I was writing that record. Okay. But I think that it had something to do with like drug-induced like rose-colored glasses.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Makes sense too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really love the centerpiece lyric of this song. The part of your charm was the way you'd push me from all the traps that I just couldn't see. It figures the one that was there to have tripped you up would be the one that was set there by me.
Yeah.
So that lyric is about self-destructiveness, right?
I mean, elaborate, but yeah.
Okay, I'll elaborate. Self-destructiveness, in the sense that when you're kind of depending on a person to steer you in the right direction, the tendency to kind of like lean on that person becomes a wrong direction in and of itself, tying back to the codependency theme from Discomfort Revisited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part of it's about enabling, and being an enabling force in somebody's life that can do harm to them, and just a thing that I work with teens also in my life, and I see those sort of patterns. It's like people who sometimes are attempting to help people but don't really know what help looks like, because they don't really understand what a person's situation is or a person's struggle is, yet they're trying to like perform help for somebody. Can just be sort of an enabling thing. You can just sort of be enabling somebody to continue their cycles that are harming them, and sometimes disrupting those cycles is the way to do it. And codependency is big, is like kind of a big theme on this record without me really understanding anything about codependency at the time of writing it. And codependency is almost simply that, and which is allowing somebody to continue the cycles that are harming themselves and all their relationships, by not breaking someone's cycle and instead allowing them to continue in it.
Okay. And then there's two lines in here that I feel kind of serve to wrap up each branch of this record. There's the political branch and the personal branch.
Mm-hmm.
And the line that wraps up the political branch is, I cut off my arm at the bone in solidarity. Capital teaches you that there's less when you share.
Yeah.
Which I've actually heard like people, especially on the emo subreddit, make the argument that you can be apolitical or even right wing and still enjoy this record. And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. But to me, a line like this is so kind of explicitly political that I feel like it should be almost impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a jab at the, like, that was the like talking point in politics at the time around socialism. This is like Tea Party era, politics. And yeah, so like the idea that the like economic idea that there's just less resources when you share things, which is, I think, a silly idea, but makes sense when it's literally about cutting off your arm and giving it to somebody.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like a jab at that sentiment, which, yeah, I just thought it was funny. I don't know.
I mean, it is funny because of that like juxtaposition, but also it kind of has a bit of a greater resonance in the context of a record with songs like Your Deep Breath and Housebroken that are about kind of these systemic issues that serve to undermine people's mental health, especially in working class situations. And so I feel like this kind of ties up that theme rather nicely of, community is sort of where we need to go in order to solve a lot of the problems endemic within like a system that puts too much of the pressure on the individual.
Agreed. Yeah. I think that, and then like that line coupled with the line a couple later, which is "Tell me again that it's all in my head."
But that was the other line I was going to bring up. I feel like that ties up the personal branch of the album too.
Yeah, and yeah, it ties them literally together, sort of, which is to say that all of these things that we are existing within, all of these like sort of things that we think of as individual, think like that pertain simply to the individual cannot be removed from the society at large. There's too many factors that are going into why all these things occur in our lives, and to completely divorce them from the world at large seems like wild and wrong, and is like this sort of, I don't know if gaslighting is the right word, but it's like this sort of like continued lie that is told to the individual to like make it their responsibility to fix, which in some ways it is, but
Sure, but yeah, I'd say that's cultural gaslighting for sure.
Yeah,
like in a broad societal sense.
Yeah.
And to kind of state the unstated obvious, it's easy for an outside observer to say, "Oh, that's all in your head," but it's harder for someone in the situation where they feel their arm cut off at the bone, or they feel the noose on the collarbone, or the gun in the small of their back, to say that, "Oh, this is all in my head," when the violence of the system is kind of directly hurting them in that moment.
Right. And in their entire lives, and in
Exactly.
sort of how how they view the world, how their world is shaped, and yeah, that sort of like ties up basically the theme of the record, which is just simply it just is going through all of these different scenarios that I've had in my early 20s or late teens that sort of showed me that most of these things are connected to a political overarching like way the world works, and basically that, I guess.
Yeah, and then to kind of cap it all off, like in an aesthetic sense, there's that aside engraved in the stone, which, you know, ends the record off with the strong imagery of death, which is just like a big, huge mic drop moment. Your home like no place is there is dead. Long live home like no place is there.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it just feels like when this like cultural gaslighting thing is just like pushing someone to this point of just like, what do I have to say? Like, it just seemed like because the dominant narrative was so much so placed on the individual, and like to a certain extent still is, as our society atomizes people even more from each other, even with like social media and stuff, and with like the way that mental health is coming up now, it's just like, oh, it's like an individual problem. We have to find the individuals who are, you know, mentally unwell and you know, like fix them. You know, it's still completely divorced from the fact that like a lot of our society is what creates these situations, and has no overarching view of how we can change society in order to curb mental health.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest unspoken themes in the record is this kind of parallel between the way that capital treats the worker and the way that the societal structure under capital treats the person suffering from mental health. That alienation is the same, and it all ties back to that kind of same pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative.
Right.
So yeah, that's Dendron. That's home like no place is there. That's everybody please read Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. That is the overriding message of this podcast episode.
Yeah. There was like a lot of discussions that I had that had sort of led up to the aesthetic of the album too. There was like a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, Tom. We were talking about this punk album that existed that I can't actually find, but Tom was like an art person, went to school for arts management, and we were talking about this punk album that was called like The Backs of Suburban Houses, and the art of Home Like No Place Is There is ripping it off, kind of. So like,
oh, sick.
The idea is that the front of a suburban house is representative of the face that a person from that area of their life puts on, and the back of a suburban house is the actuality of like how closed off they are from the world. So if you like look at the front, there's like tons of giant windows and a big door and like all of this like stuff going on, but usually the back it's just like tiny windows and like is really closed off. Like there's no light that comes in from the back of the house, and it all comes in from the front. And it was just an interesting thing to think about. And that sort of like the idea with like, and it changed a lot of my thoughts about like sort of how we're brought up, like the, you know, Little Houses. That song sort of also sums up that idea. And yeah, just sort of how suburbia is aesthetically, and I don't know. I think it's undervalued how much the environment in which we live and the things that we see every day control like how we interact with the world and how we see the world. And I think growing up in suburbia is so sterile that it has completely shaped who I am as a person. But yeah, it has a big weight on our head about how we think about how the world is. Yeah. I just wanted to sum that up as well.
Sick. Thank you.
Yeah.
And with that, I was about to say with that, I'm going to throw that back to Kyle.
Yeah, I wanted to reference a couple of things that were written about. And I think both of them were like Ian Cohen. I think in the review for this, he brought up some reference to like trees and nature, and then he did that one piece that was like about the Hotelier's reading or is leading emo's like green era, and I guess I do see that. Do you have any comments on like, or is that like an underlying imagery or something that you like to write about?
Yeah, for sure. Simply because I'm interested in, I mean, as you hear through the lyrics, like not only am I discussing like the natural, but the juxtaposition of the natural versus the disturbed. It's sort of like it's like a Taoist idea that maybe I didn't understand as a Taoist idea on Home Like No Place Is There, but like understood it way more going into Goodness. Is just sort of like where our natures are and how they're diverted and how they're disturbed, and thinking a lot about like, well, if this was in a more natural rhythm, cycle, situation, structure or whatever, how would this play out? And it has to do with literally the fact that I grew up in Charlton, which is a town that is the exact middle point between suburban, like Worcester County, and rural Western Mass. Like Sturbridge, one town over, is considered Western Mass. And the area in which I grew up in was mostly developed suburbia. So I had woods right in my backyard, and the woods and nature was like a big, like thing for me to be in and be around, while also like in a suburban town. So yeah, so both conceptually, natures and in reality, tangibly, nature have just been big in how I contextualize what's going on in the world.
Yeah, cool. I can kind of see that friction between naturalism and suburbia, even with Home Like No Place Is There, because you have like the ending of Among the Wildflowers, which you stated earlier was like one of the purest distillations of naturalism on the record, kind of juxtaposed with the imagery of people maybe like in working class situations who are struggling with their material conditions. There's kind of that friction between the two.
Yeah, or even just the opening line of the entire album, which is "Open the curtains, singing birds, tell me to tear the buildings down."
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just like it. Yeah, I don't know. There is also just like class conflict, I guess, in suburbia too. Like there's like not, I don't like to think of suburbia as like a thing that is like sorry, I'm being slow, but
it's not like statically middle class. Is that what you're driving at?
Right. Yes. Like there's like middle class suburbia, and then there's like working class people living alongside these people who are living in suburbia who are just kind of like attempting to keep up with the Joneses, sort of, to like escape their class situation instead of I think that's something that goes on in suburbia that's maybe not thought about as much, except in like maybe like a teen movie or something, where like, oh, we realize that this person in suburbia is actually poor, yet hanging out with us. Whoa. Like, I don't know if you've seen that trope, but yeah, it's much more...
She's all that is sick.
But yeah, that sort of, I think that's usually an idea that's like reserved for like the cities, and like how certain areas of the city are like, there's like great wealth directly next to great poverty, or like massive poverty, but that sort of like also exists in suburbia.
Yeah. I grew up in Las Vegas, and well, I feel like that's kind of Las Vegas is kind of like the epitome of exactly what you're talking about, because there's a lot of like class resentment and class envy in Las Vegas, because a lot of the suburbs, you have like these big, almost mansion-esque houses right next to houses that are literally like government-built projects, and all the kids are going to the same high school. And that's something that I almost never see people talk about. So thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, and Las Vegas is wild. Like we played a show on the Jimmy Eat World Tour in Las Vegas, and I don't know why, but my banter went to, why the hell are all of you living in Las Vegas? Like, what's the like? What are you doing here? Like the weirdest...
I can explain that.
Yeah, go on.
So there are three types of people who live in Las Vegas. The first type is people who come from old Vegas. The people who come from families that have been there since the city's inception.
Yeah.
Who are kind of, quote unquote, old money. The second type is California rejects.
Wait, let's go back for a second again. Just because I'm interested. Is there like some like crime like relationship to that? Like I know people. There are people. I live near Providence, and like am in underground poker games. So like I hear about like people with money from around here who are who come from like mob families and stuff like that. Is that a thing of like old Vegas? Do you know?
There's a lot of like mob descendants, but it has a lot less impact on people's quality of life than you would think.
Okay.
Like I once dated a person whose grandpa had like serious mafia ties, and financially their family wasn't actually doing so great. So there's a lot less of like a trickle down effect than you would think. Most of that money kind of stays within the original circle and doesn't move beyond that.
Right.
And something that you just brought this up, and it kind of triggered another thought. I can kind of contrast it with Chicago, another city that I lived in. The way that crime is talked about in Chicago versus the way that crime is talked about in Las Vegas is like absolutely mind-boggling to me, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that when crime is committed by white people, there's a tendency to romanticize it. Meanwhile, in Chicago, where the big mainstream narrative is all the black crime that goes on there, despite the fact that it's committed for the exact same reasons, and the money goes back to the same type of people who are controlling the city. The narrative surrounding those two things is very different.
Yeah, for sure.
So the second type of people who live in Las Vegas is, California rejects, people who tried to make it in LA and couldn't, and then bounced to Las Vegas because buying houses in Las Vegas is actually shockingly cheap. And then the third type is people from the East and the Midwest who came out here, gambled a lot, lost all their money, and then got stuck.
Word. Yeah. Word. Yeah, I know a lot of people who live in Las Vegas because I am now deeply embedded in the poker world. And like some of them are like, move out to Vegas. And I'm like, sounds like the loneliest thing I could do. Yeah. So it seems like a, I guess a good place if you want to be a professional poker player, but a bad place if you want to be a professional poker player and have a rather lively social network.
It's a terrible city, and the police force is one of the most oppressive in the country, and that also never gets talked about.
Wild.
I have a lot of family who are currently in or have been in the police force in Las Vegas. One of my aunts literally once told me that police brutality does not exist. So
Jesus.
That's the mind frame that people are coming from out there.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like a cop thing everywhere though. But one thing that I found interesting when I was in Vegas last was I saw so many people driving around with no license plates. I was like, wow, I saw very few cops on the highways, and lots of people driving around with no license plates. And I was like, damn, there's got to be a way that these people are getting away with this. Like if they're just doing it in broad daylight like this.
Definitely depends where you are. There's places that, have lower police presence, like Summerlin, and then places that have much higher police presence, like the area surrounding the university, which is kind of historically disenfranchised.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I have very little time left. Just to wrap everything up, I just kind of wanted to talk about like the impact that the record has obviously had. Like Spin, that list named it as like the top emo revival record and stuff. And I'm sure, Christian, you get a lot of people telling you like this album, changed me, saved me, etc. Were you anticipating it or anything?
I don't know. I just like tried real hard. So that's usually what I think is. I don't know that I was anticipating it being like groundbreaking, because also I didn't anticipate that this genre of music would like matter. I was making these albums because it's the only way I know how to write for the most part, and I wouldn't have anticipated it just because I didn't think anyone would really care outside of like the DIY scene, which was large at the time, but still, I just tried real hard, and that's all I really thought.
I mean, did you think writing about these topics and stuff, like, did you see that coming where people are going to be like latching onto it so deeply?
I thought it could either have gone that way, or it could have been like people being like, this is too much, like chill. Because like all of these things are just like, this is like, again, like in the Tumblr 2012, 2013 era. So like, this is like pre people talking about this stuff a lot. There's like, you'd have to like hear it. Like if you go on, like people are talking about this stuff a lot more now than they were then, and like it was really interesting to me because it was like new conversations being had about these topics.
I agree.
So I was just excited to write about it because it was like on my mind all the time. Tumblr era 2012. I was like a big Tumblr political, not popular. I didn't have a ton of followers, but I was just like big into like the Tumblr politics of the time, and all these conversations were just interesting to me.
I feel like something that's interesting is the impact that this album has had kind of in things that are socially acceptable to talk about in emo. And one thing that I've noticed is a lot of people are willing to talk about kind of, gender issues or like issues of identity in that lane. And a lot less people are willing to talk about, class conflict, which I think is maybe even more representative on this record.
Part of that is there's still also, alongside that, there's still like people aren't talking about race as much as I think they are gender or sexuality.
Yeah, that too.
And that's just the nature of that's part of the nature of the scene in general. A lot of kids in emo are white, and a lot of kids in emo are middle class, and a lot of kids in emo are also queer, and have a complex relationship with their gender, and I know that there are pockets within the scene of people that come from a same class background or a same race background that thus end up hanging out and talking about this stuff together. But it will be. It is a thing that it is a capitalism thing too. It's just like now that capitalism has accepted that like queer artists or queer people can have a place in capitalism, then it becomes easier to talk about, but also at the expense of like sort of the
the revolutionary aspect of it,
right?
Quote unquote. Yeah, rainbow capitalism for sure.
Yeah, it's just more people that are now, and sorry, and to sum this up, like this is sort of like a thing that I had talked about with a friend of mine, about like sort of what happened with the scene and with DIY and with the industry, which is just like, like pre like in the 2000s, there weren't many people that were queer and making music. And I'm not even I think about a band like the Drums, and like the Drums are like a project that was like kind of explicitly queer, like the front person is queer or is gay, and like I don't remember like knowing, like flat knowing that was a thing, but I'm just thinking like there's a lot more queer artists, there's a lot more like the image is more queer. Like I know, I'm not going to say who, but there's like a industry plant artist who I looked at and I was like, oh, this person's cute and queer looking, but not explicitly queer. Probably an industry plant. And then I looked them up, and I asked some friends, and they are. And I was like, yeah, this is like a thing. It's like when they're making an artist, like it helps for them to be in one of these like marginalized identities, because now that is a thing that is sold by the music industry, whereas it wasn't prior. And like part of the strength that the music scene had is that they were boosting artists that the industry wasn't, of marginalized identities, and when those groups no longer felt financially like that the DIY scene could financially support them, they had to like turn to something else, and the industry was like there with sponsorship money to pay them. And I don't think that it's like a thing that I would say is wrong of them to choose to do, but now there are people that are. It's just there was a lot of momentum that was carried by queer people, by people of color, by women in the DIY scene, that energy is now dispersed to also into the industry and has been individualized to like individual artists and all this other stuff. And I think that's part of the reason why there has been more less infrastructure in DIY. And that's more a thing of like there's not enough money for artists in the world to like really allow people to decide between whether they want to support like grassroots music or the industry, and also just a failure of the DIY scene to support those artists of marginalized identities when they were fulfilling their roles in the DIY scene. That's just something I wanted to touch on, because I think it's an important conversation that people aren't talking about, and like the state of music is really strange right now, and I think that has a big thing to do with it.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and thank you for articulating it.
Mm-hmm.
You've been doing a real good job of articulating a lot of things that we've been driving at on this podcast for a long time, and just kind of putting it in like real clear terms. So
yeah, real like academic terms, really, because we were just talking about like how do we interact with it and like be proactive about it, because there's so much like fake politics. Like I don't know, you like take a side and then you don't do anything else.
Yeah, and I think part of that is like, and it happens a lot in music, and something. Sorry, I know that you don't have that much time, so
yeah.
But I'm gonna elaborate on this still. I had a conversation with my friend Olivia, who's a musician, plays in a band called Wrong. Is the vocalist in a band called Wrong, and we were talking about how like there's a lot of like anarchist influence with regards to like transformative justice that is now sometimes called call out culture, and mostly called that because of how the music scene has used it. But because there's a lot of anarchist things that have, or like anarchist influenced ideas that have like found its way in, but it's being used by people who aren't anarchists, don't have an interest in community, and or don't have like religion to like morally guide them and in doing so. So like there's a lot of people who are using these things but don't care about like community. Like they care about having access to the infrastructure of a music scene, like the social, or like the general access to infrastructure that gives them, and thus some like sort of social power. But they don't care about like community as much. So like they use they use like the scene as like a way to wield their power more than they do to like have a community. And
sure, leftist concepts kind of co-opted by liberals for sure.
Right. Yes. Liberals who have like, whether they know it or not, like power interest. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm so happy we had you on.
Same.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that the people that are interviewing me, I get to say these things and have it be understood too. So thank you for that.
100%. That this is actually like the part that I was like most looking forward to, was talking about the politics.
Cool.
So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kyle, do you have to go?
Yeah, really, I should be going. So just to wrap it up, Christian, thank you for coming on. This is definitely like a dream interview for us and probably people who listen to this podcast because they obviously voted and love this record.
Great. Yeah, no problem. Let me know when you want to talk about goodness.
we have just run into the problem